What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday, and thanks for sitting through what may be the longest commercial ever. I'm Rob Whiteside. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate having you here. It is going to be kind of fun doing this one tonight, especially because my guest, I hit him up probably about 3 hours ago and said, hey, man, what are you doing? Why don't you watch this movie with me and let's talk about it? It's our favorite. It's Tyler, man. How's it going, Tyler?
And a very merry unbirthday to you or anybody else out there. Hi, Rob. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, very excited, man. So thanks for jumping in and doing this. Tonight we are going to be doing, because it's spooky season, Halloween is right around the corner, whether it's COVID or not, it's still coming. And we've got The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. So it's at least half scary. This is a movie from 1949. This was during an age of the package movies, when they were putting pieces of shorts together to make a bigger movie. There were a bunch of them. There was Make My Music, Fun and Fancy Free, Melody Time, Three Caballeros, and Saludos Amigos. This was the last one of all of them. And, you know, after you've watched it, Tyler, it makes the most sense to put this together, right? Mr. Toad and the Headless Horseman. Yeah. I mean, these are the two that belong together, right?
They're two completely jarring, differing things. Like, it's not like an anthology where you pick like some things that make sense together. Like, this is like the weirdest British like court system cartoon, followed by a horror where a man probably gets brutally murdered by a pumpkin. Like,
probably.
And then it just ends. And it's like, well, bye.
And you know, the funny thing is, I always thought as a kid these were two separate movies. I never thought that it was one until I went back and looked at it and was like, oh, it was one movie, like aptly titled The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. That's like the worst title ever, because it's based on The Wind in the Willows and Sleepy Hollow.
Arguably, it's like, here are two classics, because they kind of try and frame it that way. They're like, oh, hey, here's a book. And then halfway through, the narrator's like, well, that was certainly a book, but here's another one. And they switch narrators. Right. They try and link it.
Yeah, so Basil Rathbone does the first story, which is, of course, Mr. Toad, and it's based on The Wind in the Willows. And when you go through and you watch this one, you're like, okay, this is a nice little story at first about this, you know, this countryside town where apparently you have anthropomorphic animals mixed with actual people, which seems a little weird, right? And you know what? You know when it's the weirdest? And I don't know if you noticed this or not, because again, as like a designer, I'm sure you pay attention to animation and things. When they would get up close and they would be holding a note, you would see thumbnails and like their hands looked real, and that was a little creepy. I thought
it's very confusing, because it's like, do they live in harmony in this world, and how is people never like, hey, why does that frog own a whole house? It just raises questions. It's like humans and Muppets.
Yeah, and everything, and that kind of tracks, because everything in Muppet World is sort of like human size, and the Muppets adapt to it instead of like, and that's how it was in this world. Yeah. Like when Molly's trying to get up into the, you know, you talked about the court system. But there's, you know, I always like it when there's a rule that they follow. They don't follow a rule about clothes, because Mr. Toad has clothes, but his horse Cyril has a hat.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, there's no, and he has a horse.
And the horse is like pulls a buggy, but it's like, does he have a life outside of that, or is that the only thing that he does? Like Pluto, it's that conundrum. It's just like Disney did whatever they felt they needed to make this story work.
Yeah. Well, and when it opens up, you know, it opens up on Rat and Mole, and they're going to have tea, and then somebody comes and says, "Hey, quick, come to Toad Hall." McBadger is there. and McBadger's trying to like pay all the bills and keep Toad Hall running while, you know, Toad is out on his adventures, and he's had another mania, and he's got a gypsy cart and a horse, and they're running around through the countryside. And so he says, "Hey, Rat Mole, can you do me a solid and go out there and just slap some sense into Toad if you don't mind?" And they're like, "Yeah, we got you." And they go out to do that. When they catch up with him, there's one part where they pull him down by his pants, and they pull his pants off. But of course, he's wearing like long underwear.
They undress him and put him in his pajamas and lock him in his bedroom, which I've seen a few different versions of Wind in the Willows up until this point, and it all pretty much has the same kind of stuff in it, including that bit. And I'm like, that's always uncomfortable and very, that's just like the kind of thing you would wear when underwear. And I guess it's not weird for you to take off other people's clothes.
Well, but when they're out and they find him, and Cyril's there, and they have the, and they pull the pants off of him, he gets back on the horse for a minute and he rides. And then something that doesn't usually happen in a Disney animated movie like this is there's a huge animation gaffe where he has his pants back on again. But when they get him back to Toad Hall, he doesn't.
Even notice that.
Yeah, it was like it was driving me crazy because it wasn't like a flicker. It was like for a whole half a scene where he's still riding. So if Cyril is his horse, so this Toad has a horse, and if you started it out, it sounds like a joke. So a Toad has a horse, and if they're friends, which it kind of looks like they are friends, why is Toad beating him with a whip?
Yeah, again, it's the logic of that world, like. If Pluto is a dog, why is Goofy also a dog but wears clothes, whereas Pluto has to eat out of a food bowl on the floor? It's like just this universe that you created. It's like, okay, well, a horse is like a friend, but how do you get a horse to go? You gotta like whip them. It just raises more questions.
So they go on, and they, like you said, they take him back to Toad Hall. They take his clothes off him, like you would a good friend, and you throw him in his bed, and then you sit outside and stand guard. And Molly's like, I'm not sure about this, and Rat's like, no, it's for his own good. And then he escapes, and he goes on his adventure. Then he gets a mania about cars, and he ends up in jail because he stole one. And so then now here comes your favorite. The British courtroom scene with the wigs and the whole deal.
If there is somebody watching from the UK, and I've asked some friends in the UK, why do all of these classical stories have like courtroom scenes in them? Like I'm a huge UK television fan. I've watched, and like half Monty Python sketches all take place in a courtroom, which is ironic because in the live action version of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, John Cleese plays the courtroom guy or the lawyer. And like Monty Python does this, Fry and Laurie does this. Every sketch comedy show I know has like courtroom scenes because I guess it's just fun to mock that, or it's just such a common thing in the UK is that people go to and just watch court. Can I just share some fun things I noticed? There's like when he gets sentenced to being guilty, there's a bunch of spinning newspapers. And I noticed one of the headlines was really funny. And then I paused it every time, and I noticed multiple funny headlines. The first one is, Girl's Body Exhumed, Village Murder Case Development. You know, a kid's animation film. Victory cited in fight against yellow fever. Lightning bolt kills 2, hurts several others. Which I just found funny.
Well, you know what's cool about that, though, is it like nowadays we would pause movies to find all this stuff, and I guess that's what you were doing is pausing. And I was seeing those too as a headline for spinning, thinking they really did take some care in filling those out, which is interesting because when the movie starts, it starts with a real life. You kind of talked about this a little bit. A real life library, and Basil Rathbone is kind of narrating, and they're making their way through the library. They find the book, they pull it out, and then they show these images. And so it's really not until like almost 3 minutes in that there's actually any animation at that point, which I was thinking, again,
Yeah.
the era where this was done, it was probably much cheaper to do that because it's almost like pages of the book, still image. And then even after that, if you look at it, Toad Hall is on the hill, but there's not really much happening motion-wise. It's like there's like a butterfly flies by that just for a second, but most of the things are stationary. And so when you're talking about the attention to detail in those newspapers versus like how like slimly it was animated. Now it was beautiful. Like the backgrounds were magnificent, very like just classic Disney. But the idea that they would go to that much trouble to like put those extra little headlines in for these little spinny 1 second things, never realizing in 1949 that we would have Disney Plus and we would pause this and scrutinize as much as we do. Yet they left his pants off in the scene, and so it just again, it was. I guess it depended on who was working on it at the time.
So expensive to go back and reanimate the pants. Just leave it in. No one's gonna care.
No. We got deadlines. We gotta go. So the other thing that happens is then they're in court. He thinks he's got this eyewitness that's going to say that he didn't steal the car, and then Mr. Winky, he turns on him. He turns on him.
It looks so creepy.
Oh yeah,
it's so creepy.
Sure. Yeah, there was a blogger that had a mustache like that once, so I connect them sometimes. Anyway, so when they go back in and like he's like doing the testimony, like he turns on him and then sides with the yes, thank you. So sides with the Weasels. The Weasels get Toad Hall, and Mr. Toad gets thrown into jail. Your typical 1940s jail where they put a ball and chain on you and then leave you in
like
a
a
room.
castle too.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing in the courtroom before all that happens is Cyril comes in to kind of testify for Mr. Toad, and he does it in rhyme, which is weird. Like the whole thing, his whole like testimony is. But here's the other weird thing is now Cyril's wearing a coat, a tie, a shirt. He's got clothes, but still no pants. I don't know. Arch Fox said in the chat, like maybe he's a masochist. Whatever, it's we don't judge. But I'm just saying, it's really weird that he's like the clothing situation. Like again, I like a rule. Of how does this world work. So anyway, he escapes. He goes to see Rat and Mole. They take him in, but Rat's going to turn him in. He's going to rat him out. Hey-o. And then it ends up it's McBadger. Then McBadger's like, dude, Mr. Winky, he's the one that like screwed you over. He's at Toad Hall right now with the deed. And then they go and they use this like secret entrance to get back in, which I guess you would have in castles. I mean, it's kind of weird.
The other version that I've seen of this, which apparently more closely resembles the book, was that they're like, oh, here's the secret entrance to Toad Hall. And then Toad is like, wait, why is that there? And it's like, your father built these tunnels in case the hour ever came. And he's like, what hour? And he's like, Toad's hour. I'm like, what? That doesn't make any sense. You had a chance to explain this and he made it more confusing. Since he was a kid, Toad's dad knew that he was going to screw something up and sell his house and they need to break back in. Can I just say that Toad is like the biggest piece of garbage? Like, the reason McBadger is stressed with taking care of his house is because Toad has destroyed people's properties and like run over bushes and knocked over lamps, and their city is coming to collect the money for these damages. And so when he apparently borrows or buys this motor car off of Winky or the Weasels and then goes to jail, it's like, oh yeah, good. He's like a criminal. He's destroyed all these places. Why should we care? He's like not a good person. He would go to the bad place. Oh, wait, the right he does, because the right ends with you going to hell.
Right, which again, like, where did we miss this in the movie, right? Like, so in the ride, you go to hell. Like, where did we miss this in the movie? I feel like when you add something onto a Disney attraction, do you just add hell onto a Disney attraction? That's just, it's very bizarre. Absolutely, 100%. Here's the other thing about that attraction, though, and we can talk about this later, too, is that when Disneyland opened up, this was an opening day attraction, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride in 1955. Yep. The movie came out in 1949, and they said, hey, let's take half a movie we did, make a whole building for it. You know, that's a cool idea, right? And they're like, yeah, I love that. Meanwhile, where's Zootopia for us? I mean, I'm just saying, like, it's really weird that they would just take half a movie, go ahead and give it its own ride. I don't know. I'm a little.
But they built that attraction for like $5,000, and it was made out of like plywood and glue. Like those early attractions needed like so much refurbishment.
And yet, I would take it. I would take it at this point. Like, bring it back. I would take it.
Oh yeah.
Totally. So then they go and they break in. And they go and they get the deed back. The weasels are all over the place. There's a big fight scene where the weasels are drunk all over the place. And apparently they've multiplied, because when he went to the bar, I feel like there were like 8. And when he breaks into the house, I feel like there's like 80. And so they go, and Mr. Winky's being protected like he's the mob boss. They find their way in. They get the deed. They win the day. Toad's cleared. Everything's great. And then, of course, like you said, Toad, of course, being a problem child, decides, wait a minute, I got one more mania. And I'm gonna ride in. You know, I'm gonna take an airplane now, and I'll show you the world. And then, of course, he does some more damage on his way out of the picture. And then it's like, over.
Why are they even friends with him? Like, he is just the worst. Like, he goes to jail for his misdeeds or whatever, and then everyone's like, oh yeah, we're still good friends with him. It's like, he's such a self-destructive, toxic individual. Why would you continue to be friends with this guy who rightfully went to jail for a bunch of stuff and then didn't pay people back for the damage he did? But yeah, at the end, the musical version that I've seen is like 4 times worse, because he's even more of a terrible person. And then at the end, they're like, oh, but a friend is still a friend. And it's like, oh, okay, which is a terrible, terrible message to give to children.
Maybe. So they wrap it up and they go back to the library. And now we have a new narrator, and it's almost, and I looked at this. So this movie is an hour and like 8 minutes. This stops like almost right halfway in the middle. So, I mean, that was a really good job that it's like, it is 2 pieces. This is the only thing that makes sense between these two, right? The 2 stories don't really get along, but they're about the same length. So let's go ahead and do it. So it splits about in the middle, and then Bing Crosby takes over. Bing Crosby, everybody's favorite Christmas crooner, takes over, and he is going to narrate the story. About Ichabod and the Sleepy Hollow. So, but here's the transition. Is they're like, he takes over and he's like, well, there are a lot of great, English heroes, but we got a lot of them great heroes over here in America too. Actually, he says the colonies. He's like in the colonies too. And in 1949, were we calling it the colonies? I don't know. So, and he's like, yeah, we got Pitco's Bill, and we got Paul Bunyan, but of course we got Ichabod Crane. Yep, I always think of them together. I don't know how they left Ichabod out of Tall Tale. So they go to tell this story, and that's the transition, is that, well, that's great what they do in England. Here's what we do in America. We do scary ghost stories. And then when it opens
Those
up,
are loose connection.
Yeah, exactly. When it opens up with Ichabod Crane, and he's a school teacher, and he's reading a book. Again, countryside looks beautiful. He's a very interesting character. He's a little bit reminiscent of Goofy in his build, and he's a very interesting character in the fact that he's a complete nerd, but he's like a cool nerd because he's like a foodie, and all the women swoon over him, and he's a singer, and and he's a school teacher, and he's a little bit of a kind of a swindler on the side, and they don't know that. But so he's walking through, and he's got his face in a book, and something happens, and he pulls the book away, and it's blank pages. So it's not like they couldn't scrape some lines across.
Yeah, they did so much detail with the newspapers. Even all the text that went in all those articles By the way, I missed one article. It was Baby Hit by Meteorite, which I thought was the best one.
Oh, yes, I saw that one.
That was the funniest one. If you had to add anything, like a random piece of text to a newspaper, that was the best thing. It was just, it was Meteorite lands near baby, which I thought was amazing. They put so much detail into that. And in this one, I feel like the detail is like, I don't know, there's just something about the animation style where it would cut to like 5 women like looking at him like, ooh, and like half their like hair wouldn't be like have line art on it, or their eyes would just be like dots or whatever. Like, it seems like that one, if it was 2 separate projects that they worked on, then I could totally see them having 2 different animation teams, and one of them just, not working on the animation to match the other one at least, which makes a bit of sense.
So they get to the town, and they were talking about the town, and they talk about the shoppy. Bing Crosby actually says a shoppy. I always thought that the Old English pronunciation of SHOPPE was shop, but he says shoppy. He says shoppy. And so I like rewound. I was like, did he just say shoppy? Maybe I've been wrong all my life about how that works. And so then they talk about Brom Bones, and I thought I had a hot take on this. I really did. I looked at Brom Bones and I thought to myself, this looks a lot like Gaston.
Oh yeah.
So
it's that kind of town. Like, first of all, the whole red thing, but also he's a pretty thick dude, and he's like, they drew him to be strikingly handsome compared to Mr. Ichabod, where they made him like look like an ugly human being who is just like 2/3 of their head is ears, and like
this picture,
not ugly, not as attractive.
But if you look at this picture, there is so much similarity. The red, the yellow, the size, the jaw. I mean, there's so much. The black hair. I mean, you don't have a ponytail, but there's so much similarity between the two. It's kind of crazy how similar they are. And at that point, I thought, well, is Ichabod sort of a Belle? I mean, he's got his nose in a book. I don't know. But so then comes Katrina, who is like the richest farmer's daughter. So it's almost like, again, the setup joke. It's the farmer's daughter, but it's the richest farmer's daughter. And Katrina comes in, and I got to tell you, I feel like Katrina, although she does give off supreme Cinderella vibes, she may be the worst person ever. Later on, like
everyone is in this special. Everyone's like a not good person. Like Ichabod comes to this town and you're like, oh, he's like the teacher, and then it's like, and then he sees Katrina and he's like dreaming about her, but he's dreaming about like, oh boy, her money and her farmhouse. Like he's not even thinking about her or how like beautiful she is. He's thinking about like how if he married her, how rich he would be and how much stuff he'd own. And then Brom is just like, oh, well, I want her because she wants Ichabod. And then she sees that these 2 guys are after her. So she's like, oh, I know what I'll do when I have these 2 men going after me. I'll make them fight each other for me by inviting them to the same party or something like that. And it's like, none of them are likable.
Well, exactly. But even Ichabod, when we talk about him, like he's the hero, so to speak, of this story, right? And yet he's like, he's stealing food out of little kids' lunchboxes, and he's like making special trips to people's houses just so he can eat their food, and keeping a journal of who's got the good food and who doesn't have the good food, and going back to them and circling people and giving them little checks. And it's just like, he's supposed to be the hero. You're supposed to be pulling for him in a way, and they've made him out to be kind of like lecherous, like weirdo dude. It's just uncomfortable, right?
Oh yeah. I mean,
So
also the idea that there's other women in this town who are looking at Brom because he is very handsome. And they make a point of saying, like, oh, all his pranks were never very violent or something like that. It's just like, you know, you kick a person into a barrel. Ha ha ha. Everyone laughs or whatever it is. Or it's like, oh, like, I can't even name them. And then all these women are like going, and it's very much the same thing with Gaston. There's tons of women that are like, oh, that Gaston, he's so handsome. And then Gaston's like, yeah, I don't want any of them. I want this one because she's the prettiest or the richest or the weirdest one.
I deserve the best. Yeah, so again, more correlation between Brom and Gaston. So then there's this big party, and they're going to go to this big party, and apparently one of the traditions at this party is that you tell ghost stories. So obviously Ichabod's there for the food. They show him just eating like crazy. He's the skinniest thing in the entire movie, but he eats all the time. And so they're eating, like he's eating there and he's getting the food, and although like, you know, Katrina has like, he dances with Katrina. Brom decides he doesn't like this, but he knows that Ichabod's weakness is superstition. So he decides to play on that and tell this story of the Headless Horseman, and it's told in song by Bing Crosby. What? Bing Crosby? Or Brom Bones? What you come at Mr. White Christmas? Don't you do it. I will, no, White Christmas.
Like a 2-second delay, and it made it sound like I was talking about the next thing you said. Anyways.
Yeah. So he sings the song, and it's at this point that I realize that no one else has spoken at this point. So in Mr. Toad, you have Rat and Mole and Toad and Badger are all different voices from the narrator. But in the Adventures of Ichabod, I mean, I keep calling it that, but in the Sleepy Hollow story, it's only Bing Crosby telling the story and singing the songs. So there isn't a separate, you know, there's not a separate group of people doing voices, which I thought was very interesting. Again, the difference between these two. The first one, Mr. Toad, there's just the Merrily, Merrily, Merrily song, which is a great song, and I find myself singing it all the time once I like watch this movie. And then in the other one, in the other one, there's like 3 or 4 songs. There's the one about Katrina. There's the one about the one that he sings about the Headless Horseman. There's one that when he comes into town, again, like where he's sort of like Belle, he has his own song where they're singing Ichabod, Ichabod Crane, but it's all Bing Crosby, and I hadn't noticed it until that point. And then he's singing this song where it's all creepy and everything. And I see this picture, and let me see if I can pull this picture up, because there's a man sitting in a chair, and he's looking all creepy as Brom is telling the story, and he's kind of adding his own parts to it. And so,
this was a weird bit.
I just like, I looked at that and I was like, that's Anton Ego from Ratatouille. That's clearly him. I mean, I feel like even there was a scene, and I tried finding it to put it in this picture, where he sort of tinted his hands like that, and you know, I couldn't find that picture, but it was like it looked just like him as he was sitting there, and it was like it was driving me crazy. So. Anyway, so he sings a song, and it's really super creepy. And now the whole time, Ichabod is like scared, and he's shaking in his boots, and he's like putting pepper on a deviled egg like you do at a party. And the whole time, Katrina's laughing at him. This is why I'm like, she's horrible.
Same she's just looping animation of her just like. That's the whole thing. She doesn't do anything. She doesn't say anything. That's literally all she does, is that like half eyelid thing where she's just like, that's the whole thing she does throughout the entire, like, the chat is talking a little bit about the Johnny Depp one, and I like that they give her more of a character in that version of the movie. Right. But then again, I've never like read the original story, so I don't really know if she does have a character or not, but they also make her like more of like a witch kind of person in the Tim Burton version. Anyways.
Well, and in that one, Ichabod was a cooler dude. In this one, he's just as goofy as can be. You know, that was weird casting for that one. But it's interesting. Again, we know that as a huge, like, creepy story from the TV show and the Johnny Depp movie, and yet it's paired with Mr. Toad. That's still a very weird pairing. But then he sings a song. He says, "If you can get over the bridge, you're free of the spell." And oh, by the way, have a great night. Then we see Ichabod going through the woods on his mule, and he's headed towards the bridge, and he's freaked out by everything. There is a scene where there are these, I think they're cattails that are like banging on a log, which he thinks is the Headless Horseman coming. And
yeah, it's like, and he thinks he's hearing that, and then he sees the cattails smacking around on the log, and then he's like, "Oh, how dumb of me! It was just a plant sounding exactly like a horse." He doesn't say that.
But he laughs at himself at that, and the laugh does not sound like Bing Crosby. That's the only thing, and I never looked this up to see like if that was somebody else laughing or if Bing Crosby just had a horrible laugh, which, again, I would hate to think that about Mr. White Christmas, but it could be a thing. So now they've established like that whole like jump scare, like the fake scare type of thing, and then all of a sudden here comes the Headless Horseman. Headless Horseman comes. They have sort of like a scary / Three Stooges kind of a moment around the tree. He's on the horse. He doesn't realize he's on the horse. He gets across the bridge, and you're like, good, he's safe. He's safe. And then he throws the pumpkin through the bridge, and then like it lights out, and then they do this creepy thing about next morning there's nothing but Ichabod's hat and broken pumpkin. And that always confused me as a kid. I'm like, so wait, what happened? Like, I always had the assumption that Brom was the Headless Horseman, and he was playing this trick on him.
That's because of the movie. That's what they do in the Tim Burton one, is we get that whole moment with the bridge and the throwing of the pumpkin, and then it turns out it was Brom dressed as him. But then there's also the actual Headless Horseman later on, Christopher Walken, by the way, and so in my head I had associated that because I had seen that movie, the Tim Burton one, more than I'd seen this original cartoon, and so I also was like, oh, but isn't the whole thing that it's Brom? But in this one, like, you could interpret it that way. It's possible that he is just like, oh, he's telling the spooky story, and then later I'm going to do a prank where I actually dress up and do this. But then I think like you were saying, like, what happens to him? Is he dead? I think the narration says something along the lines of, most people think that he's alive and well still, and he's probably, gone to another town and he married some rich person. But I probably think that he's dead. Thanks for watching, everyone. The end. And that's where it ends. It's just like, oh, but he's probably dead. Bye. Like, it's so bizarre that it ends on such like a grim, spooky note. For like the beginning of this movie starts with like Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Here's some fun credits in a Disney style, and then the end is just like, by the way, this guy's probably dead. Have a good night. It's so confusing that the two of these things are put together, or that there isn't like some kind of afterword where the book goes in. it's like, oh, don't worry, these are just stories. You can open a book and escape to a story. Go to your local library. Like, it doesn't end on like a fun, uplifting thing. It's just like, oh no, we're out of footage. Bye.
You would almost think they would have flipped them and put, especially because it says it in the title, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. You would have put like Sleepy Hollow at the beginning and Toad at the end, and where he flies off into the sunset, and it's kind of a happier story, right? But the way that ends, like, I was watching it too. It's in the last 9 minutes, of the movie, basically, is when it's all of like the Headless Horseman stuff. And up until then, it's just kind of like setting the scene of the town and Ichabod, and he's a school teacher, and Katrina, and she's not a nice person. And so then, like, in those last 9 minutes, it's kind of that whole chase thing, with him running away from the horseman. And then again, leaving it open-ended like that, I can see you doing that in, say, like a M. Night movie, but like a kid's 1945 movie, that doesn't seem like something you want to leave open-ended. And they do close it off by saying, oh, well, he could be blah, 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 like you said. But you don't really know for sure. And I find that slightly infuriating. But, I'm just saying. So
You
and then
sound
it's like,
slightly infuriated.
I am. So that's why I'm a bigger Mr. Toad fan than I am an Ichabod fan, and I've actually I have merch because I always have merch. This is actually, let me do this. Hold on a second.
Are those Tsum Tsums?
Yeah, this is Tsum Tsums of Mr. Toad, and he and Cyril are dressed up in women's clothes when they were like escaping, and then it looks like books. See, it's supposed to be
that's
looking
so cute.
It opens up.
Oh
and
my
then,
gosh!
And then it's got the Headless Horseman and Ichabod and Katrina, which would make you think there's no Grahame there. Does that mean? And so there's also a thing where the head comes off. The head comes off of the head.
I thought you were about to say he's under there.
No. By the way, too, there's a poster in here of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, and it spells out the word Mr., whereas you never see it that way anywhere else, even in the movie. It actually spells the word Mr. instead of that. And then, of course, there was this thing, which is a little too close. So the Headless Horseman and Toad. So again, a little bit too much stuff that I've collected on that. No, I've got the Headless Horseman only because it was attached to the Mr. Toad stuff. But I've always loved Mr. Toad, and I was sad when they took the ride out at Disney World.
So a lot of people were.
Yeah.
Were you part of that movement?
Yeah, Penguin Project says he's going to send something in Discord. I bet he's got something really good. I'm not sure if I'll be able to put it up or not, but we can try. So I did miss it, and I don't remember it all that well because of when it went away. It was 1998. I don't remember it all that well, but I did love the fact that when I went to Disneyland, I got to ride it again. So I'm really excited that it still exists somewhere. Have you ridden the one in Disneyland? You haven't been to Disneyland, right?
I haven't been to Disneyland. I mean, I've been on Winnie the Pooh, but that's clearly not the same. But I've watched a lot of there's a lot of great Disney parks YouTubers, and so they talk about the history of it and then how it got defunct, and then they're like, and then the whole movement about how people rallied around this attraction and how much they loved it, that they're like, we don't want to get rid of this. And this was before the internet. This was before we made a whole website just to try and save the country bears. People just heard about this and got together way before the internet existed to make this sort of rally happen where they're like, save this attraction. Disney's like, okay, we hear you, but we're still getting rid of it because we need this Winnie the Pooh ride. And I mean, I still would love to ride it. That's the thing about these two odd short animations that they put into this movie. I keep using quotes because it's only an hour. It's not like the standard hour and a half that we have now, or the standard 90 minutes, let's say.
Well, I feel like I only open you up for short form things because we watch Fuzz Bucket and we watch Out, and now we're watching this, and they're all anywhere from 8 minutes to an hour. So, yeah.
And we were talking about another thing for us both to watch, and it's 20 minutes long. But it just goes to show that these two things are so iconic that they inspired an attraction, but also that version of Headless Horseman or Sleepy Hollow, let's say, is the famous scene of that pumpkin flying towards the camera that's been used in the Simpsons Trios of Terror, which I suggest everybody watch. And it even Tim Burton replicated it in his version, which I don't think was Disney. It might have been Touchstone at the time, but that exact shot of the pumpkin flying towards the screen, Tim Burton used that as well, clearly inspired by the animated version. And Mr. Toad, I mean, Wind in the Willows is a huge thing in the UK, and it still is. They made a musical of it recently, which is full length. You can go watch it on Broadway HD. And if you like streaming stuff, you should go, but for theater, full length shows that are professionally filmed. And even that is I'm watching this musical and I'm remembering the Mr. Toad short, and I'm like, these are both so bizarre. This must be the original source material. I haven't read the original, but it's so weird that it's a beloved thing that they keep remaking it, or Disney made an animation and then they made a musical, then they made another musical. and then like it still exists. And then there was the weird live action Disney version with 3 of 6 Monty Python members and Kevin Kline and Stephen Fry and all these amazing British actors.
Well, that one wasn't Disney.
Humanized.
I don't think that one was Disney.
That Disney. It was called Wind in the Willows in the UK, right. But then when they released it in America under Disney, they changed the name to Mr. Toad's Wild Ride because people knew the ride, not necessarily the Wind in the Willows story, which is so bizarre.
No, you're right. I was thinking of the Wind in the Willows version that was released in the UK. So yeah, I did see that it was released as a separate one, but that's, obviously that's a treasured story for them. I mean, they say that in the beginning, is that this is a treasured story. And again, Penguin Project in the chat said this is his favorite story, or favorite book. So I know that it's probably, a big deal, but I think as kids, all we saw was what we saw of Mr. Toad. And like you said, he wasn't so nice in this story. So with all this said, and I assume I know what you're going to say about this, but, you've seen this before. You watched it again tonight. Tyler, man, would you recommend this movie?
I think I would. I think it's one of those classic Disney things that it's like you watch now and it's bizarre and it's something you can laugh at with your friends. But it's also like the Sleepy Hollow portion is like just classic Disney Halloween stuff. Like he's still in the parks, like the Headless Horseman, or during Halloween, he used to come riding down Main Street. It's the kind of thing that sticks with you, and even now, you can see its influence in other places. And that chase scene with the Headless Horseman is really, really well animated, unlike most portions of that bit. But the Mr. Toad bit is so bizarre. Again, influences you can see, like in the new Mary Poppins movie. There's a very Mr. Toad kind of chase scene on some vehicles, and the crazy eyes thing on one of the animated characters. I would recommend watching it. I wouldn't. It's much more. It's one of those things where it's probably more enjoyable with people. I watched it with Thomas, my partner, the very first time I watched it, and I'm like, this is so weird. But then we were like, but Brom Bones though. So I would say it's very enjoyable to watch with other people. Okay. But if you really appreciate Disney animation, you could probably watch it yourself and really find it enjoyable still.
Yeah, I would say that this is one of those things that, it's one of the Disney animated classics, and I feel like everyone should watch all the classics, and not all of them. Some of them are very slow, and I feel like this one is. It's very slow pacing. It's an older movie. But I do think it is a classic, and I think that you definitely need to watch it if you are a huge Disney fan. I don't think it's something little kids would enjoy at all in 2020. No. They may get to the end of Netflix by the time that, quarantine is over and have nothing else to watch, or get to the end of Disney Plus and go, Mom, I've seen everything in Disney Plus. And it's like, before you watch Fuzz Bucket, we'll put you down here in front of The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. So I think too, because of the tie-in to the parks and that it is an attraction that still exists in Disneyland, that people should watch the movie. But I do think it's sort of more of like you should watch it rather than it's like a really cool sit down feel good kind of a movie, right? Now I think it's got good vibes for Halloween because it's spooky season like we talked about, and we're going to have some more Halloween reviews coming up. Next week is going to be Hocus Pocus with Jill. Very excited about that. And then we're going to do Halloween Town and Nightmare Before Christmas. So we got a lot more spooky season stuff coming up, but I think that it really does fit into that genre, and because of its age, it may, if you're watching it late at night, it may be like a little bit spookier because of that. It's definitely not Annabelle or something that's going to give you nightmares, but it's a fun story. And then, again, tied into the parks, the fact that, when the Boo to You parade is happening and the Headless Horseman comes down, although it's part of the cavalcade, but when the Headless Horseman comes down, that's a huge deal. And if you don't know the story, now you don't have to watch this movie to know the story. You could have read the book. Same thing with Mr. Toad, I guess. But I think that it's all kind of combined in the Disney culture. So I would recommend it for any Disney fan and anybody who just wants to watch all the Disney classics, definitely. But if you disagree with us, let us know in the comments. Again, we've got a lot of other spooky season stuff coming. I keep calling it that, but it's Halloween. That's what it is. But we've also got Haunted Mansion. We have our review still on the network for that one. And Tyler, you had something you wanted to talk about as well.
Oh yeah, we're doing some Halloween Ride Rehab watches this month. We're doing 2 episodes a month now. Every other week, every other Saturday, we do an episode. If you don't know what that is, it's kind of like Mystery Science Theater or Riff Tracks. We watch retro Disney parks garbage. This month, or the first thing we're doing for Halloween is watching the Mouseketeers special, which I understand you guys have watched before. Plus, I downloaded a video of retro Disney and Disney parks commercials from the 1950s all the way up to the 1990s. The first one is like a peanut butter commercial for Peter Pan peanut butter. And the puns are so uncomfortable and funny. And then there's a second Halloween sing-along. But then next episode, which will be the week before Halloween, it's going to be on the 24th. We're going to be watching with Allison. And I talked about Tim Burton. Did you know Tim Burton made a Hansel and Gretel short film that was aired on Disney once and never again?
I only know because you told me. I didn't know before then, but it's pretty weird. It's definitely weird.
We are watching that.
That will be fun. So thank you guys again for joining us. If you haven't already, please hit like, so that other people can find this stuff. And if you haven't, also please subscribe, because we've got a lot of great content on the network. And if you haven't been to carouselproducts.com yet, you should go. Lots of cool stuff and new items coming out every Thursday. So Tom and the gang have another one, another something special planned for you guys on Thursday night. So don't miss that either. Tyler, thanks for being here. Everybody in the chat, Eric, Jill, thank you guys for being there. Thank you, all of our WIGS members. We love you. And we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great night.
Bye.